welcome back to Leading the Frontline, sponsored by Legion. Thank you so much for being here. We have a fabulous episode for you today, but if you ask me, every episode is fabulous, but of course it's because we have fabulous guests. That's what makes the episodes amazing. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you're catching this episode. Whether you're watching or listening, you're going to have a fabulous experience. Either way, something we always guarantee here over at Leading the Frontline. And this episode is with my guest here, Narinder Dhaliwal, who is the former Global Vice President of Operations Excellence at Americold, where she led a team responsible for service and operating performance across 240 sites in 13 countries across North America, Europe, APAC, and Latin America. With 25 plus years of experience leading global operations and driving operations excellence and leadership roles at Americold, Coloplast, Kimberly-Clark Corporation, Avon Products, Newell, and Macy's. And in 2023, Narinder was named to Supply Chain Digital Magazine as top 100 women in supply chain, which is amazing. Narinder, congratulations on that accolade. That's amazing.
Yeah. That's sweet. Thank you.
Of course. And those are some household names that we have there that I've just read in your bio. So I'm sure that you have a plethora of stories and anecdotes that we'll talk through today. But here at Leading the Frontline, we ask every guest the same first two questions that kind of help us to get to know you a little bit better. And the first is truly my favorite, which is, what was your very first hourly job?
So, believe it or not, a librarian. So, I was
Really?
yeah, it was well, it was helping me pay for school. So, I was at undergraduate and basically worked at the library putting books away in the stacks. So, it's like, yeah,
That's amazing.
that's what I did. And then I was also an RA, though, resident assistant. So those were two of my first jobs. But yeah, the librarian hits me. It's like, and I used to love books too, so I was a bookworm. But anyway, so that was my first job, believe it or not. Very
That's
sexy.
amazing. I love it. I love it. I too was an RA, by the way, so I'm sure we'll have to exchange some stories at some point. It's a great job to have, and probably for many the first exposure to leadership, and guiding people, right?
That's exactly why I
It's a
took
great
the
experience
role.
for that.
It was
Did you?
yes, it was. I was coming to this country fairly new, so I started high school here, and my whole desire to be an RA was that I really wanted to lead and get used to the culture and the people, and I was a bit of a shy person, believe it or not, when I first came to the U.S. Now nobody believes that, but so I really wanted to break out of that, and it did. I was an RA all through undergrad and graduate school. So it was a very good experience. And you're right, it was first round into leadership. So, and dealing
That's
with problems,
amazing.
right? All the headaches,
Yeah, right.
wake up calls and stuff.
Right.
So,
Conflict
yeah,
resolution.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. It is a very good way to get a lot of exposure really fast into that life. And you also mentioned that you were a bookworm and that you loved books in the past tense. Are you less of a bookworm today?
I think time. It's
Yeah,
usually,
right.
usually on vacations and on the plane when the books come out or some downtime. But I typically don't read novels. It's always about self-help or learn something, advancement. For some reason, I'm drawn to those kind of books versus stories. So yeah, so it's always about learning something, and that's kind of one of my passions, period. No matter how old I get, I think I will be always on a journey to learn and explore and be open-minded. So, yeah, so when I was growing up, I used to, my mom used to have to peel the book away from me to go to sleep. And these days it's a little bit harder, but yeah, see, work gets in the way. Yeah.
Right, right, right. Well, I think that we will probably come back to this notion of continuous learning and lifelong learning as we continue on in our discussion. But as I mentioned, I do have a second question for you that we really like to ask everyone. And that is if you can share a bit more about your background. As I read even in your bio, you've worked with a number of household names and companies. And it would be really interesting to know more about your background and also what led you to your current leadership role.
Yeah, so it's interesting because growing up as an Indian family, there's only two avenues your parents tell you can go in, and one is be a doctor. So, and I mean, it's true story. So either you become a doctor, and if you're going to fail, then become an engineer. So that was a studying requirements. Like you could choose one or the other to go to school. So I chose engineering as an undergrad. And then
Wow.
lo and behold, I got into graduate school with also the aspiration to get a master's in mechanical engineering. And then very quickly, after a few interviews, I realized that's not what I want to do. I want to be a leader. So I switched over to get my MBA, no regrets there. And then really that launched my whole career into operations, leadership roles, starting with Kimberly Clark, which I was there about 14 years running manufacturing sites, and a variety of operations roles for Huggies and Kotex and paper machines, etc. So that's how my career launched from, okay, I'm going to be a doctor. Nope, it's going to be an engineer. Nope, we're going to be in operations. In leadership roles, right? So that's kind of how I evolved. And then every role from there, to be honest, every company I worked for, I did manufacturing ops for 14 plus years with KC. And then I moved into distribution ops because I really wanted to be well-rounded supply chain leader. And so distribution operations became my next big conversation in my career, and that was with Avon products. And then I moved on to Macy's, and then Coloplast, which was a med device company, ran global ops with them. And then after leaving them, I went to work for a private equity company in Newell, and then eventually landed at Americold. And Americold was really interesting because that was a bridge from all my operations experience more into a corporate role, but helping our operations drive their P&L and hit their budgets and improve overall. So that was a slightly different twist to my background. But it's all been in leadership roles and all in operations. Yeah.
Wow. That's amazing. I mean, I think it's really hard as we grow, in our lives and our careers to figure out what we don't want to do. I had a mentor once who said, if you can figure out what you don't like or what you don't want to do, you've solved a significant portion of the challenge ahead when you are 19, 20, 21 and trying to figure out the rest of your life. So when I hear you reflect on, your experience coming to this country and going through school and then figuring out, okay, no, I don't want to be a mechanical engineer and this is the pivot I'm going to make. It's great that you were able to figure that out at that time and without having to kind of complete a job or go start your career in a place where you really weren't fulfilled and being able to figure out, okay, well, the business track and operations and leadership is really where you feel the satisfaction. So that's a really interesting story. And I think a lot of people can probably relate or resonate with your story around pivoting and realize and making that realization that what they are happy with today is not necessarily what they actually want to do tomorrow.
That's right. Yeah, and I think, certainly my parents played a role in this, right? Because they chiseled it down to a narrow, this is what we want you to do. And just a backdrop on that, most of the time when they choose those two disciplines, it's about, hey, I want you to make sure you can land on your feet and good jobs, et cetera,
Sure.
et cetera. So a little bit of backbone there, but yes, it was very early days. I always wanted to be, heck, I wanted to be on the Fortune 500 magazine, like cover, but it hasn't happened yet. But
Yeah.
um, so it was all
Yet.
about lead.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So it's all about leadership for me, and certainly have matured through that journey as a style evolves too, and I'm sure we'll get there. But so it's an evolution, but leadership for sure has been my love and passion to really help people and drive performance through people.
Amazing. And actually, speaking of leadership and evolution therein, how would you describe your leadership style? How would you say it's even evolved over time?
Yeah, so I think, early on in my career, the tendency is you're focused on just being in your own space, right? You're trying to get good at your job and you're still young and growing. So you're not, even though I started actually my career, I was very fortunate when I joined Kimberly Clark. Immediately I was running a team of 25, 30 people, hourly employees, and then it evolved from that to degreed employees, etc., through my career. But early days is really you're still trying to find your way, right? Who are you? What I mean, when they say 20s, 30s, 40s, it's different evolution in yourself. It's true. So I look back going, early on, it was a lot of confusion about how do you lead? How do you deal with conflict? And to your point, even the RA is early in the stages of leadership. But as I evolved into the leader, it became less about me. It became more about who my team is and who are we serving, right? Who's the customer? Whether that customer is inside the company or outside the company, it becomes more about others, not about you. And so what I've learned is, yeah, if you take the light off of that and put a lot of depth into your team as well as your customer, it all pays back dividends because you win people over, you build credibility and trust, and solutions just land better when you're trying to deploy things.
Certainly, certainly. I think it's really interesting to hear even that your first role after graduate school at Kimberly Clark afforded you this opportunity with so many people to lead. I'm curious. Did you find that there was a massive learning curve? Did you make mistakes along the way? Like, what were some of the takeaways that you had from that first experience?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that Kimberly Clark does extremely well, and I feel very, very fortunate to have joined them right out of the gate. They're a very professional organization. They put a ton of time into their leadership in terms of teaching you. I mean, I used to go classes constantly with them on whether it's conflict resolution, communication skills, pretty in-depth leadership training along the way. And they're very structured around process improvement. So luckily, I got to learn from the best in class personally. And I even to today, I still continue to use the things loved learning at Kimberly Clark because I watch some of the junior leaders now coming into companies. They're dependent on their leaders, right? And so if they're not getting the love and the support and the teaching, they won't succeed very well. And so I personally feel very fortunate that I landed in the right place and evolved. But that's also very important for frontline leaders to have that, which is missing in a lot of places today.
Right, right. It's a wonderful story of how we get our start and juxtaposing that with how some leaders are dependent on their own leaders when they're coming in and just starting to learn how to lead and what their leadership style is. There are some companies that are really kind of the pinnacle for how leadership should look, or what it should look like, I should say. So it's really interesting to hear that, and I'm curious if as you reflect on even seeing junior leaders come in and just throughout your career as you've led other leaders, are there common leadership mistakes that you see? Have you ever even given advice to other leaders on how to avoid some of those common mistakes?
Yeah, I think, I say this tongue in cheek a little bit. I think a lot of companies and leaders are very good at strategy, but they'll bring it down about here into the organization, but it doesn't come all the way down. And so then the poor guys on the floor, and I have a huge love for the supervisors and frontline leaders because if they don't get that from their leadership, then it doesn't work. So that honest communication, transparency down, and hand holding and really doing the change management properly so that it hits the floor. So it's about really being aware of, and they're my customers. I mean, I'm even counting them. Frontline leaders are your customers, right? So how are you treating them? How are you teaching them? Will hit your business. What I teach my team has always been about, hey, it's not about just your initiatives or projects, but are you even listening? Do you even understand what the issues are? And will your solution really going to work? Have you spent enough time with the associates to understand their headaches, so that it will work? So I, even early on as I was learning leadership, we always tend to go for results, 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 and you forget the process of getting the results. And the process is really about listening to your customer inside or out or on the floor, whatever it is, where you're trying to change something for the betterment of them as well as the company. So I tend to want to go ground level with my guys, and that's what I've been teaching my entire career is like, hey, it's not about your fancy project in your office. It's really about what's it going to do across the fence, and will it sustain, and is it going to land, and did you make their job easier? So those are
Absolutely.
pivoting. Pivoting is very important. So just because we deployed something doesn't mean it's going to work, right? We did all our due diligence, but then somewhere along the line, you might get more feedback saying, well, this part works, that doesn't. That willingness to pivot will also avoid mistakes. And that all builds credibility and trust. So you'll be successful in the long run, right? And then you can expand that into a bigger project, if you will.
Absolutely. I think those are awesome takeaways, and frankly, they're so applicable across any industry and any type of role in that, whether it's pivoting or whether it's, I always say like meeting your people where they are, which is effectively how you're talking about transmitting this information and disseminating what the goal is in effective communication to the rest of the team. And I think when we all kind of assess what it's like to be an hourly employee or a manager of hourly employees, there are sometimes so many layers above those recipients of that information or those decisions that it can feel, sometimes you get a little bit lost in things or you don't really understand the why. And I think it's important too, just given, the podcast, we're talking about leading the frontline here, to better understand, even how you see the frontline shaping the future of work, because certainly there are trends that shape the frontline leadership and frontline employees, but I also think that there are frontline employees and leaders who actually shape outcomes and the ways that the workplace might change. So, what are your thoughts on those things?
So the front line is the most important thing, and that's why I think what Legion is doing to make jobs easier and better for the employees is the key. And a lot of leaders miss out on that. Like I said earlier, like it gets stuck somewhere from the senior leadership to the vice president, director level, maybe GM even. But then, to get down into the trenches where it really matters, you have to learn to make the supervisor's job easier and the hourly employee job easier. That's what gets you the performance, right? So, I mean, most of my career, if I'm frank, up until maybe a year or two, where automation and AI became more of the let's do more of that technology-wise. Most of my career, the results that I got were strictly through the associates. I can honestly quote this: 10% productivity improvement year on year, with no fancy capital, with no fancy technology. It was strictly about engaging the employees and getting their inputs and valuing what they have to say to solve the problems. And then once you're done with that low-hanging fruit, now you can go into the more dramatic changes that are introduced through technology or innovation. But they have to, if you get them involved, it will land. And so we don't spend enough time, in my opinion, in a lot of organizations, giving the supervisors the tools they need and the associates the tools they need. And we tend to think, well, just keep pushing them, keep making them work harder, and that doesn't get the results. So I would love to see an evolution where there's more training and development in the trenches than there is at senior executive level, right? So what about them? Because and it's not HR training. Sorry to say, Tracy, I know you're in HR, but it's beyond HR training. It's like you know, if you're trying to get them to be more productive and you're deploying tools like Legions or others, then how are you teaching them? What's the change management process? And that training needs to be sustainable too, not one and done, right? Because people will leave and come through retention and turnover. So how do you keep that going and make it part of your DNA as an organization?
Absolutely. And I totally agree. HR training is not the thing necessarily that helps teams to feel they're most productive or accomplish, these exceptional outcomes that their executive teams are setting out for them. It's everything else. And I'm curious when you even think about your hourly teams that you've led, and hourly leaders who you have led at the front line. What how did you get them to care about those opportunities for learning and development? How did you get them to see that this is an investment in their careers, in their accomplishments and their competencies? Because sometimes I think we meaning any leader, hourly or otherwise, can be met with a bit of pushback sometimes, whether it's like, I don't have time to do that, or this is not important to me. And there has to be, again, kind of this why behind the what. So I'm curious how you delivered on that why.
Yeah, so when I'm talking training, I'm talking more of, the related to the jobs, how to make them more productive, because nobody wants to come in and not do a good job. Believe it or not, even, people aren't here to just be lazy. They're really trying to do a good job, but things get in the way at work, right? So it's more about whatever you're deploying, getting the buy-in with them. But if you give them a seat at the table in early times of whatever you're trying to design and get their input, they know better than you and I. I mean, they know better than the project leader. They know better than the engineers, because they will either snicker behind your back and say that's never going to work, or they can tell you to your face it's not going to work. And if it's not going to work, how can we design this better for you? So for me, getting hourly employee engagement has really helped me a lot in my career. Not just believing my team, or my engineering team, or whoever's on my group or operations groups. I literally go on the floor and I want to know the person I'm going to impact, what their thoughts are, and will this solve the problem? So you can build respect and credibility with them. And then the more you show that you actually solve something for the betterment of them, then there's more buy-in. And then that can lead to other forms of training. I mean, I've had frontline leaders who, there were a dock worker who were promoted to supervisor because they were doing such a great job. And then I had another guy who didn't have his high school degree, so and I was very clear that unless you have that, I won't promote you. He went and got his GED on his own, because he wanted to progress in his career with the company. So it depends on what you're trying to teach, right? So that's kind of the roadmap I've used, is just engage them, involve them in the solutions, show them you're actually going to do something about it, not just I'll get back to you kind of conversation. And then it just goes from there.
I think it's wonderful advice for others to really think about how they get in front of their, I want to say constituents, but really these are, they're stakeholders, right? Like the people who are at the front line are ultimately, to your point, the internal customer, that leaders need to really understand and be able to relate to. So I think that's wonderful advice for others to walk away with. And one question that I ask everyone at the close of an episode here at Leading the Frontline is, around advice, actually. So you've given a lot of advice in this episode, and I'm curious what the best advice you have ever received was, and something hopefully that you continue to live by.
Yeah, keep growing. Stay coachable. I'm still to this day coachable. Like I'm not perfect. Being, put the ego aside and just sometimes, I mean, we all have egos, right? So I get hurt too, I still do. But it's really just stay curious, keep learning, and keep listening and pivoting as needed be, because it's not a straight line. So those are probably the best advice that I've gotten. And again, I can't under or over deliver the message of the frontline leaders really matter and the associates, because that's what the magic is. So just keep working with them and making sure you're making their lives better. And one thing that I always also a lot of times we think they have differences than us, but the reality is everybody has the same desires, right? That is, want to be loved, want communication, want to know my purpose, how am I contributing as a human being? They're no different. So why would we not communicate and teach and make them win as well, just like we want to?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Perfectly said. Thank you so much. And I think it's a great way to close out on what you said in the beginning, that you are a lifelong learner. And it certainly goes the distance when you talk about that being a massive piece of advice that you continue to live by. So thank you so much, Narinder. And I'd love to invite you to share where the listeners can connect with you, learn more about you and your work, and maybe even learn more.
So I'm on LinkedIn like everybody else, right? So certainly on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to provide email address or something, but certainly through LinkedIn is probably the easiest way to connect.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And for all the listeners out there, again, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you're catching this episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. Narinder, thank you for your time and all of your insights.
Thank you.